Good day. Welcome to Going Remote. My name is Chris Colbert, the managing director of the Mint Labs, and I used to be the managing director of the Harvard Innovation Labs. I'm here today to talk to you about going remote because the entire world is going remote. And my worry, concern is that we go remote correctly. The I guess good news, or I don't know how you look at it, maybe bad news, is that some percentage, 40% of white collar jobs are theorized to be remote jobs in the future. And the inference is that it's a win-win for everybody. The employee wins, the employer wins, the world wins. And the data actually supports it. Research, lots of research, fair amount of research has been done on this. And it suggests that remote employees are actually more productive than on-premise employees. So we should be good to go. There's a tiny, tiny little problem attached with the whole thing. And that is this, that most organizations, most managers, most people think of remote working as fundamentally a technological problem to solve. Like, how do we assemble the right technologies to enable the human being to actually create value from their home? And my point of view is, while technology is certainly a factor in all this, a critical factor, it is not the primary factor. And the primary factor is actually, sorry, let me go back, is this. That at the end of the day, the ability to make remote working work for workers and for their employers is tied directly to how well we understand human behavior. Their behavior as workers, our behavior as managers, behavior. I'm sorry, going the wrong way. And it all points or sets up for me this idea that the function of remote working is actually not about a way of working, it's about a way of being, and specifically the behaviors underneath being. And again, if you want to be good at remote working, if you want to help your organization be better at managing remote workers, what I'm really suggesting to you is get really good at behavior. And one way to get really good at behavior is to study psychology, and specifically this guy by the name of Abraham Maslow, you may be familiar with, psychologist from the 1950s, who spent his entire career studying human behavior, studying human needs, and ultimately arrived at this, the hierarchy of need. And his whole premise is that the nature of man, why we do what we do, why we don't do what we should do, why we shouldn't do what we do, is all a function of this hierarchy. That human beings each and every day make decisions through this set of needs, and it's bottom up, bottom to top. So first set of needs is physiological, second set of needs is safety, control, third set is sense of belonging. Ultimately, you may get to self-esteem, you may get to self-actualization. But the point here, that if you want your remote workers to be productive, you want them to be happy, you've got to connect the function to this set of needs. A little bit of support for this, proof for this, study done by Stanford University a couple of years ago, focused on a company called Ctrip, which is a Chinese travel agency, but fairly large at the time, 1,000 plus people. And they wanted to study the impact of remote versus on-premise working. And what they focused on 500 remote workers, and they determined over the 9-month period that there was a 13% performance gain, productivity gain, and interestingly, a 50% drop in employee attrition. So pretty material numbers. Qualifier to the remote working situations, unlike today, where most of us are remote working and dealing with children and home stuff. In this particular case, all the workers had specific setups, privacy, space away from home life stuff, And also, I think perhaps most importantly, they were given the choice to participate as remote workers versus not. So again, 500 of the 1,000 employees participated in the remote working study, pretty positive numbers by the end of the 9-month period. However, and this is the big asterisk, the big exclamation point, 50% of the people that participated in the study who had higher levels of productivity, less inclined to quit, 50% of the people actually wanted to return to work. So as much as it worked, it didn't really work all that well for at least 50% of those workers. And by the way, majority of them had to deal with pick back up on a 40-minute one-way commute to work. So 80-minute round-trip commute was worth it to reconnect with their I guess fellow employees. So again, remote working is not a way of working as much as it is a way of being. And so as you think about, well, how do you ensure that it really does work, that it reflects the nature of people, the behavior of people, the needs of people? My view is you've got to look at it through 3 different lenses that are overlapping lenses. There's a philosophy lens, like how do you generally want to approach this? There's certainly a technology lens. What do you need to do to set people up to be functionally capable? And then the third lens, which is maybe the biggest lens, is the protocol lens. Like, what are the standards of management and communication that you're going to apply to ensure that this really does work for everybody? And if you look in the middle of that little Venn diagram, you see, once again, Maslow's hierarchy of need, because I believe that all of it, the philosophy, the technology, and the protocols all need to point to one or more of those need states. That if you want your people, your employees, to be happy as remote workers, their needs have to be met. And that's, I think, the task of this system. Another way to say it all is, instead of spending all your time looking closely at the technology, don't. Spend time looking closely at the humanity that is subjected to the technology. So how exactly do you do this? And I didn't write a book called Going Remote, but possibly I could. Subtitled 5 Lessons on How to Make Remoting work for your organization and for you as a manager. So I came up with sort of 5 basic lessons that I want to talk you through. The first one, which is really about the technology, remember the Venn diagram, the 3: philosophy, technology, and protocol. So the first one, perhaps ironically, is about the technology. And the simple but actually really complicated task here is the importance of eliminating all friction. All friction. What's funny is most technologies don't actually eliminate friction. They actually even create friction in the form of, particularly in the form of startup, learning how to use the technology. There's all sorts of friction in terms of the lack of integration between technologies. In some organizations, there's friction around different users using different technologies. When I was at Harvard, some subset of my staff used Slack, some subset used some other communication platform, some subset didn't use either. And that lack of consistency between people, whether they were remote workers or not, created all sorts of friction. So I think the first order of business for any remote working organization, or any organization trying to become more remote, is to really take a cold, hard look at the technology in place and determine what level of friction exists, and doing whatever you can to eliminate it. The second to-do or lesson is about creating the right KPIs, key performance indicators, or you can call it the right metrics, the right measures. But here's the deal. The deal is you are undertaking a change in how your organization works. And so the question is, how are you going to measure the efficacy of the change? How will you or your organization be able to determine if the remote working experiment, if that's how it starts out, was in fact successful. You can go back to C-TRIP and say, well, the measure of success was productivity / performance. The measure of success was employee retention. And productivity is where I think 99% of organizations go when they think about remote working. The worry is if all of a sudden people are out of sight, out of mind, that their productivity will lag. They'll mess around all day. They won't actually work very hard. They won't get things done. And that's obviously not a good outcome. But I argue that productivity, while it is certainly one of the critical KPIs, you have to make sure that employees are productive. I believe there's a whole other set of KPIs that I think the enlightened remote worker manager would recognize. And once again, they're KPIs that are all related to Maslow's hierarchy. My theory being, if you meet every level of need, then the human being will de facto be happier, and in their happiness will be even more productive. That's the logic flow. So what are the levels of measure? What are the KPIs that we want to look at beyond productivity as they relate to Maslow? And the first one is tools, which goes back to technology and the lack of friction. So at a physiological, really base level, do your remote workers have the essential tools to do their job? And that's something that you can survey them on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannual basis to determine if you are in fact being successful vis-a-vis tool provision. The second one, which we're going to come back to, is do they feel a sense of safety? Do they feel secure? One of the losses from an on-premise to off-premise or remote situation is implicit confirmation. In the regular world, in the regular office, there are a multitude of interactions between employees and each other, employees and managers, that provide them a sense of comfort, a sense of confidence, and fundamentally a sense of safety, because they see people all the time and they get acknowledged all the time. And in remote working, all that is gone, or most of that is gone. So how safe do they feel? And again, we'll come back to that. Third one, how is connected do they feel? Again, in the real world or the regular world or the physical world, you're connecting with people all day long from 9 to 5 or whatever. In the virtual world or the remote world, that connection is more tenuous. And so how well connected do they feel? How much a part of the team do they feel? Recognition and appreciation. Again, in the physical world, I walk down the hall and I see you're sitting in your cube and I say, hey, John, excellent job with whatever. It's easy for me to give you feedback because I see you and you see me. In the remote world, it's not that easy, but it's important. And so it has to be a KPI. How well are you doing recognizing your remote team? And the last one is really the big one, and it's taken from a book by an author by the name of Daniel Pink. And he determined that the highest, most productive employees in the world are the ones who have achieved a level of mastery, autonomy, and purpose, meaning they feel that they can really realize their full professional potential, their mastery, they have autonomy, they have freedom to make decisions, and that what they're doing as a job is connected to a bigger reason, to a why. That too can be a measured thing, that at the end of any period of time, whether it's 9 months or 9 years or 9 days, the question for your employees that are remote workers is, do they feel safe? Do they feel connected? Do they feel recognized? And do they feel as if they have the opportunity to become masters of their profession, autonomous in their actions, and do they have a sense of purpose? All measurable things. I mentioned psychological safety. For those that have not heard about the term psychological safety. It was coined several years ago as part of a research project undertaken by Google. And they wanted to understand why some of their teams were higher performing than other teams. So they sicked the big research people on the task, and after several months of study, and the project was called Project Aristotle. After several months of study, the team ultimately determined that the number one attribute of high performing teams was a sense of psychological safety. Number one. And so I think that applies to remote workers, that if you want the people out there to feel fully invested in the work you need them to do, fully engaged, you've got to work towards an environment that ensures that they feel safe, they feel trusted, they feel able to speak their mind, to make decisions. They have that autonomy. Sort of safety is arguably sort of the most fundamental variable in this whole thing. Lesson number 3, or to-do number 3, which is a little funky, but it's also I think just as important, is this idea of committing to what I call third dimension management. So here's the dirty little secret about managing remote workers effectively. The best way to manage remote workers effectively is to be an effective manager, to be a great manager. And the terrible truth is that most managers are not great. In fact, this is the bell curve, the standard distribution curve. 75, 80% of everything is approximately average to bad. The same is true for managers. The majority of managers are average to bad. Only about 15 to 20% are actually good to great. And so if you want to be a great remote worker manager, then really what we're talking about is you being a great manager. And in my world, there's kind of three different types of management. There's first dimension management, which is you do the absolute minimum. I think a lot of people do the absolute minimum. Second dimension management is when you realize that the way to get what you want for the organization is on the back of investing in the people. And that's kind of a selfish way, which is I, the manager, have to deliver my KPIs, I have to deliver my business objectives. The way to do that is to actively manage people, and there's some other derivative benefits. But then there's this third way, which I call third dimension management, which is really back to Maslow's pyramid, where we are focused on the top of that pyramid on helping people realize their full potential. And that it's a stance that is not selfish, but selfless, in the sense that we sit here believing that we owe them. We owe them the guidance, we owe them the support, we owe them the challenge, we owe them the love to realize their full potential, to achieve mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So you say, well, what's the measure really of third dimension management? Like, how do I know if my remote workers are achieving what it is I want for them? And my definition is this: that every team member, every remote worker that you have on your team knows exactly where he or she stands against expectations. He or she is motivated and equipped to exceed those expectations, and he or she has the latitude to realize not just those aspirations, but their own aspirations. And it's really just a way of capturing the attributes on the right, which were from the Maslow view that I shared earlier. Another way to think about all this, I think great third dimension managers are cheerleaders. They're taskmasters. Holding people accountable is a big part of this thing. And then the last part is they're teachers. One of the things I ask managers all the time is, what did you teach yesterday? And I don't know, 90% of the time people look at me like this, meaning they didn't actually teach anybody anything because they didn't necessarily acknowledge that that was their job. Another way to think about great third dimension management, great remote working management is you're clear, you're consistent, and you're courageous. And the courageous really relates to a couple things we're going to talk about. So, question for you, take a quick second. How are you doing? Not as a remote worker manager, but just as a manager. Because if there's opportunity to get better, then I encourage you to get better, because the remote thing will only put that much more strain on your employees and even on you. If you desire to get better, if you desire to get great, my advice is practice makes perfect. It's like learning how to play the piano. You don't just decide to be a great manager. You don't just decide to be a great remote worker manager. You decide to learn how to get better at it. A couple of things that I really believe in, two little capacities that are language-based that are really important. One is the art of gentle confrontation. The ability to look somebody in the eyes, whether it's in person or over the screen, and challenge them in terms of what they did or didn't do. And then the other side of it is the art of positive feedback, which is the ability, again, to look somebody in the eyes and connect them with them way and give them feedback in the way that's not just positive, but is actually motivating. One of the things I've told every manager that ever worked for me is great is not effective feedback. Me telling you that you did a great job is not effective feedback, nor is it particularly motivating. And then the last thing I'll say about all this one is that managing is really two jobs. It's the job that you have, the work that you have to do on a daily basis, and then it's this responsibility to help people realize their full potential. And they're two separate jobs, and the best managers in the world recognize that they're two separate jobs and commit to them as two separate jobs. Okay, the fourth lesson is maybe I don't know if it's the biggest one, but it's the important one. And that is the protocols. So we talked a little about technology. We talked a little bit about philosophy. And now I want to talk about the protocols that have to get implemented to increase the chance that your remote workers are not just productive, but they're happy. And so there's some defining protocols, delivering protocols, and communicating protocols. So in the defining protocols, I to fill it up with a bunch of definitions and recognize that underneath that it says clarity equals safety. And we are after safety. The clearer they will be, the safer they will feel. The safer they will feel, the more productive they will become. It all fits together. So what do you need to define? Job descriptions. You'd be amazed at how many people don't have job descriptions, which may be okay in a in-person on-premise environment, but in a remote environment, it's a terrible, terrible mistake. Because absent knowing exactly what I'm supposed to do, the little voice in my head starts questioning my worth, questioning my role, questioning my relationship with my boss, questioning everything. So job descriptions that incorporate performance metrics, requisite behaviors, responsibilities, tasks, etc., are key. Second one, defining short-term goals and deliverables. Remember, when I'm home alone, I'm remote, I'm working alone, I'm in nothingness, I'm in space, I'm in my home, I'm in my house. I need definition. Give me goals. Give me deliverables. Be really, really pointed about what you expect from me, not just in the job description, but what you expect from me on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Defining collaboration methods. Some interesting research has been done that proves that Zoom and Skype and Microsoft Teams, video conferencing is a terrible way to collaborate because people shut down. They're afraid. They're afraid to communicate. They're afraid to collaborate. They're afraid to share. And so preferred methods include Google Documents, sheets in the cloud that people can post their ideas to without fear of judgment. But the bigger point is define how you choose or recommend or propose collaborating. Defining team time, which is how are you going to ensure that people remain connected as people? not simply as functions, as drones. So every Friday at 4 o'clock, you're going to have happy hour, or you're going to have just a half-hour check-in where we're not talking about work, we're talking about our realities, our humanities, our lives, our families, whatever. And then the last definition component, what I'm calling cultural rules. So what are the rules around when people should be available, what people should wear, whether it's okay to have kids on screen, whether it's okay to have your pet in your lap, whether it's okay to have a glass of wine by your side, whether it's okay to be off video if you don't feel like being on video, and whether it's when you're available in terms of weekends, late at night, what have you. But the point here is, again, define it in advance. Don't allow it to stumble around in the dark for weeks and months, creating anxiety for the people that work for you, or confusion. Okay. Definition, delivery. Make sure that you get those KPIs in place, because again, the whole point here is to achieve something. So getting agreement on what you're trying to achieve, what are the outcomes that you and your organization are after, and that your staff is after, your remote workforce is after. And make sure that you're measuring those outcomes, and make sure that you're reporting those outcomes on a regular basis, even if the outcomes aren't the best outcomes. Report and then talk about what you're going to do to make progress or improvement at each of the metrics. This relates to the last one, specific short-term goals and milestones. Make sure that you are following them up. Make sure that you are asking about the status. Make sure you are supporting where you have to ensure that your employees can achieve all the things that you've asked them to achieve. By the way, so this goes back to the management piece, in the sense that I really do believe that holding people accountable is a critical capacity of management generally, and remote working management particularly. The ability to say to somebody, I'd like that report in my inbox by 5 p.m. or the equivalent. What's remarkable is how many managers aren't good at this. And so you'll have a conversation with an employee about a to-do or a deliverable, a task, and you won't conclude it with what you expect and when you expect it by. And so that sets up sloppiness. It sets up an open-endedness that ultimately creates, call it a shade of gray, that ultimately translates into either your unhappiness or the employee's unhappiness or lack of confidence that they're doing a good job. Holding people accountable is a critical part of remote working. And performance feedback. Remember, these folks are out of sight, out of mind. And so each and every day, their little voice in their brain is going to be asking themselves, am I doing well? Does Chris like me? Does he think I'm doing a good job? And so don't have them have to ask those questions. Be consistent and persistent about giving them feedback on not just their goals and deliverables, but how they're doing in general. And this is another sort of general management thing that I think really applies. Evaluations alongside day-to-day feedback, week-to-week feedback. I really believe in biannual performance evaluations to make sure that everybody knows where they stand against expectation. And then the last part of the protocol is this communication piece, which is helping, particularly if you're starting out in a remote working experiment, helping everybody understand the nature of the experiment, helping people understand why you're doing the experiment, what you're trying to get out of it in terms of the KPIs, creating an umbrella to the endeavor, what I call a motivating context. Another sort of critical piece is transparency. And this goes to psychological safety, in the sense that psychological safety is derivative of people believing that they live in a truthful, transparent environment. And so make sure that you are communicating frequently and you're communicating honestly about everything that's going on, the good and even the not so good. When voids or vacuums are created, that is what spawns rumors. It's what spawns insecurity, a lack of trust. It spawns a bunch of really not pleasant things. One thing about the truth transparency thing, though, and that is the importance of balancing, making sure that your employees, your remote workers feel in the know versus knowing too much. So there is a line you can cross, which can become too burdensome. And so be a bit thoughtful, a bit sensitive to making sure you don't cross that line. And then the last lesson is really back to philosophy, which is really what I said at the beginning, that this isn't, to be successful with a remote workforce, yes, you need frictionless technologies, for sure. But I think what you need more than anything is a commitment to the behavior, your behavior, their behavior, understanding their behavior, monitoring their behavior, modifying their behavior. Whether a remote workforce works or not, yes, in part is measured by productivity, but ultimately it's measured by behavior and by how people feel about the job that they are in, and what it enables for them in terms of realizing their potential and doing it in a way that feels connected to other people. So all of this boils down to, really, to me, it boils down to the question of management. Whether the construct is a remote workforce or an on-premise workforce, fundamentally, the ability to get the most out of people in ways that work for the people is a function of what I call enlightened management. Really committing to third dimension management and to helping people realize their full potential. A lot of what's required in that involves doing things that we don't necessarily want to do. Very few people want to hold other people accountable. Very few people want to give people negative performance feedback. Very few people even like to give positive performance feedback. But if you really care about the outcome, if you really care about a successful remote working environment, then I think you've got to step forward and say, I'm going to do the things I don't necessarily want to do because it's the right thing to do. So 3 final things I'll leave you with. Number 1, committing to what I just said, committing to enlightened management, committing to the need for rigor and dealing with the discomfort associating with managing people and generally, and remote workers in particular. Number 2, embrace the philosophies and protocols that I just discussed. This presentation will be available to you for the next 12 months, I believe, so make sure to visit it often. And then number 3 is recognize that everything you do as a manager, a remote manager, or a not remote manager, is being watched and followed by the people that work for you. People follow the leader, and so just recognize that if you want your remote workers to behave a certain way, then the way to make that happen is to behave that very same way. With that, I hope this was helpful. I'm sorry we are not together in person. Hopefully one day that will be true. Wish you the best with going remote and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks very much.